Early labor can feel confusing and exhausting and even a little bit scary, especially if you've never been through it before. But I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be. God actually designed early labor intentionally as part of the process to prepare you to meet your baby. So today I'm going to walk you through what the process of early labor usually looks like and my top tips for keeping you calm and prepared for what's about to come. By the way, if we haven't met yet and this is your first time stopping by my channel, my name is Eve. I'm a labor and delivery nurse, a birth doula, and a Catholic mom to two who is super passionate about helping women prepare to give birth in a way that honors their body, their baby, and the one who made them both. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in learning more about, go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you never miss an upload. I would be so happy to have you stick around. Alrighty, so let's start at the beginning and talk about what early labor usually looks like. Let's walk through the process together so that you know a bit about what to expect. And then after that, we can talk tips. So I'm going to be honest, early labor can look a lot of different ways, especially depending on what number baby this is for you, especially if it is like your second, third, or subsequent babies. Early labor can kind of sneak up on you and be really sudden, but that's not typical. So I'm going to talk here in terms of what is typical, especially for first-time moms, because this is usually a little bit more intimidating, especially if you haven't been through it before. Usually early labor is a longer ramp-up stage where your body is actively having contractions, but they're not very intense. They're kind of a ramp-up for what is to come. Typically during this stage, you're going to start having contractions that feel like mild period cramps. A lot of the time they sort of start in your back and wrap around to the front, and they can go on for hours and even days. So early labor can be really, really long, but the good news is it's usually pretty mild and not very intense at first. So even though it's long, it's not going to be those huffing and puffing, really working to get through type contractions that you see on TV. You might also experience things at this stage, such as losing your mucus plug as your cervix starts to dilate, or having loose stool because your body is ramping up in prostaglandin production, and that also acts on the GI tract, so that's also a sign that you're in early labor. Typically, these period-like cramp contractions are consistent and timeable at this stage. So they might be anywhere between 5 to 30 minutes apart, and usually they grow closer together and stronger and longer. But how far apart they are at the beginning doesn't really matter as long as they're consistent. Consistency is what sets real labor contractions apart from those practice Braxton Hicks you've probably been having the last few weeks of pregnancy. Emotionally speaking, at this time, you might be excited and feel chatty and maybe a little bit nervous as you start to realize that something's happening in terms of labor, and you'll usually still be able to talk during and between contractions for a while. So you're not typically pausing to close your eyes and needing to focus and breathe through them. Like, they're not going to be that intense at first. Like I said before, early labor can be really long, especially if this is your first baby. So I say prepare to be in it for the long haul. This is way more like a marathon or an endurance event than a sprint, okay? And again, making the caveat, everybody's different, everybody's labor length is different, but typically early labor is going to last an average of like 12 to 20 hours in a first-time mom. So if we were preparing for a marathon or an endurance event, I want you to start thinking about the types of things that you would be doing to make sure that you are conserving energy and able to get through it for the long haul, because that's kind of how we're going to treat early labor. It's going to be very similar to some kind of endurance sport, which leads me into my first tip for surviving early labor without losing your mind. My first number one tip is to distract yourself and stay in denial that labor is happening for as long as humanly possible. Now, I know it's a balance here because nobody really wants a car baby, but I promise you I see it way more often that women jump the gun and end up in labor way longer than they thought versus ending up popping their baby out on the side of the road by accident because they ignored labor for too long. So once you start feeling these early labor contractions that are pretty consistent and they are feeling mild, but they're still there and they're still noticeable, If it is the daytime, I want you to start doing things to distract yourself, like packing your bags if they're not already packed. Maybe you could make a postpartum meal and stick it in the freezer, take a shower. Make sure that you just have your life ready and put together. Do some things that you enjoy. Maybe you can take a walk with your husband and your kids or your friends, or whatever you need to do to distract yourself so that your mind isn't just solely focused on these contractions that are happening. Another fun thing to do while in early labor is either take a swim or go get a massage, things that help relax the fascia and help your body to feel loose and relaxed. Always good things for early labor. That's if it's during the day and you know that you're not going to be sleeping. If it's during the night, go back to sleep as long as possible. And I mean, this even counts during the day. If you're in early labor during the day, certainly rest and take a nap. We're going to talk about that in a second. But if it's during the night especially, try your hardest to go back to sleep. Even if you're not able to sleep through the contractions and you can just sleep a little bit between them, it's still going to help you in the long run. So that's another really good way of distracting yourself and managing the early labor process without being so overly focused on it. Tip number 2 is to hydrate and eat. Fuel your body during this stage. This is one of the most important things for you to do to serve your body and make sure that you have the energy for what is to come in active labor and during pushing and postpartum. There are 2 things that your body really needs in order to keep labor going, and those are minerals and glucose, okay? So to hydrate, I want you to be thinking about hydrating with liquids that are not just straight water. Of course, it's great to drink water as well, but if you can be drinking things like water with electrolytes or bone broth. I personally love the Element electrolyte packs. Or you could do things like coconut water or bone broth, or let's see, what else? Red raspberry leaf tea, that's really good for mineral support. Anything that is not just straight water that is also going to give your body a little bit of extra nutrients. Now, part of the reason why is because during labor, your body is in a state of high neuromuscular and metabolic demand. So I know those are kind of big words, but essentially what that means is that your uterus, which is a smooth muscle, is contracting and relaxing for many hours potentially if you have a long labor, all the way until you meet your baby, and then even afterwards during postpartum to get your uterus to shrink back to its normal size. As that smooth muscle is firing over and over again, it's using up a lot of minerals. So you want to make sure that you are repleting those mineral stores, continuing to give your body what it needs once it uses those minerals up to support that whole process. When we keep on fueling our body with the minerals that we need, it will help support that uterine muscle to work efficiently and prevent it from getting overly tired throughout the labor process. So we're really wanting to focus on doing what we can now to prevent exhaustion, which leads me into the fact that you also really need to be eating during this time. In the later stages of labor, it can feel harder to keep food down. You can tend to have a little bit of an aversion toward eating anything as your body is working harder and harder. Kind of like if you were running for an extended period of time or doing a really intense workout, it's unlikely that you're going to want to be eating during that time. So now, while labor is still kind of mild and you're able to talk and you're able to rest, this is the time to get those calories and that fuel into your body that it can conserve for later when you're not going to want to eat as much. Your uterine muscle is also using glucose. It needs glucose to be able to function. Your uterus needs a steady input of glucose and a stable blood sugar in order to continue to contract and to prevent exhaustion. When we don't have enough calories and enough fuel in our body, this can actually lead to muscle fatigue and a stalled labor, which is part of the reason it makes no sense that some hospitals don't let you eat and drink during labor, but that's another discussion for another day. The point is that labor demands calories. Our bodies have something called glycogen, which is actually the stored form of glucose. It's glucose that is stored in our muscles throughout our body. And there is some glycogen stored in the uterus, but it is very little. So your uterus doesn't actually have the ability to store a lot of glucose in the muscle itself, which means that you need to be continually refueling that glucose as you're in labor. Another reason why, aside from muscle fatigue and exhaustion in general, is that our uterus, when it uses up all our glycogen stores, it causes blood sugar to drop, which causes a rise in stress hormones. And stress hormones, such as adrenaline and cortisol, actually directly impact the production of good labor hormones like oxytocin. So not only is it a muscular, like physical thing that we need these calories and this fuel, it is also actually a brain and hormone related thing. So just keep that in mind. You need to be eating and drinking during early labor as much as possible so that you're forward thinking and that you have the energy for what is about to come. Now, my next early labor tip is going to be to rest as much as possible. This goes back to that point of energy conservation. That's what we really want to be focused on during this stage. And that means both mental and physical. But something I want you to be mindful of as you're resting in early labor is that you don't want to just lay flat on your back or recline. I want you to rest smart and in a way that's going to help you later down the line. Again, be forward thinking while you're in early labor. You should be mindful of your posture during this time so that you can help baby to get into an optimal position to make your labor shorter, easier, and more efficient down the line. Your baby's back is heavy, okay? And so therefore it follows gravity. And if we are in early labor, having these consistent contractions, but we're in a reclined position like this, baby's back is going to rotate towards our back because it's following the point of gravity. And this can lead to a posterior baby, and a posterior baby can lead to a longer, more exhausting labor. So if you're going to sleep or take a nap or even just lay down for a little bit, try to rest in positions that help your baby's back to favor gravity in the right direction. So you can use positions such as an exaggerated sideline position or resting with a peanut ball in between your legs to help baby's head engage in the pelvis. You just want to be mindful of the positions that you're resting in because you are still having contractions during early labor that are helping your baby move down. So we want to help them move down in the right way and not in a way that's going to be counterproductive for the rest of our labor. At this point, your environment should probably stay relatively low stimulation and relaxed as much as possible. This is going to help your brain and your nervous system shift into a parasympathetic or relaxed state, which is really where we need to be in order for those good labor hormones to get flowing. And again, we want to be relaxed so that we can conserve energy for later. Something really interesting that I didn't learn until a couple of years in the birth world is that spontaneous labor usually starts at night because melatonin, that hormone which you've probably heard of, maybe you've taken melatonin to help you fall asleep at night, melatonin and oxytocin, which is the labor hormone, have a synergistic relationship, which means they work together. They favor one another. So when you have more melatonin in your body, you also have more oxytocin in your body, which means that your contractions are more likely to start at night when you have higher melatonin. Super cool. I really believe that God designed it this way on purpose, that most labors start at night, because that way the energy and the environment does stay low stimulation and allow for better rest. So like I said, if it's nighttime when your labor is starting, try to go back asleep and sleep as long as you possibly can. But if it's during the day and you're able to, definitely try to take a nap. But just try to be resting in positions that are smart and going to help baby come down the right way. My last early labor tip is to labor at home as long as possible and avoid getting to your birth location too early. I know it's really hard, especially if this is your first baby. You start feeling those contractions, and a lot of the time, we just get so nervous and excited that something is happening that we actually jump the gun. We can have all of this excited, nervous energy, and especially if you're using a contraction timer and it's telling you like, these contractions are really close together, you should probably go to the hospital. Sometimes we freak out and we're like, oh my gosh, I should go to the hospital. I should go to the birth center. And then you end up being there for way too long. And it's also not uncommon for labor at this stage to stall when you get to a birth location too early, just because there's a lot of emotional and hormonal components to that. One way to tell if you are leaving too early is if you still feel, again, if this is your first baby, if it's your second baby or third baby and you know your pattern by now and you don't present this way, that's a different story. But if you've never done this before and you are thinking about heading to your birth location, but you're still feeling pretty good between contractions and you can still talk through them and you're feeling pretty relaxed, that's a sign that it's too early. The point at which you leave for your birth location, you should really be having to focus in on every contraction contraction, you should be breathing through them, having to use your coping mechanisms, and you should be pretty focused in between as well. When I am working with doula clients or working in a nursing setting, I actually care a lot more about the emotional and mental state of a laboring mom than I do about dilation. And so when you notice that shift from feeling relatively relaxed and okay to feeling like this is really, things are hot and heavy, I'm working hard, that's a good indicator that it's time. If you haven't reached that point emotionally yet, it's probably not time. So what I recommend doing instead is staying at home as long as possible, because all the things that I mentioned before, like resting and eating and hydrating and distracting yourself, all those things are going to be way more feasible in the comfort of your own home versus at a hospital or in a birth center. Now, this is also one of the reasons that I always recommend hiring a doula, because a lot of women reach the point in early labor where they're not quite able to sleep or distract themselves through contractions, and they need a little bit more hands-on support, but it's also not quite time to get to that birth location yet, and a doula can come to your home and help you to cope without having to jump the gun and go straight to the hospital or wherever you're giving birth. So highly recommend, especially if this is your first baby, and especially if you're giving birth in a hospital. All that to say, basically early labor is not the time for you to really settle in and do all the active labory type things to keep things going. This is more so the time for you to recognize the direction that things are heading in and prime the environment by taking care of your body so that later down the line, when things do become more active, you actually have the energy and the reason and the mental and physical space to keep coping well. Okay, friends, those are my tips on how to manage early labor without losing your mind. I hope that this helps. If you want more information like this, I have a birth course packed full of tips and education and information on how to prepare for the God-centered natural birth of your dreams. Like I said at the beginning of this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you never miss an upload, and I will see you back here next week.